Let me begin with something that may sound simple, but it is not. In fact, it may be the strangest question we can possibly ask. Right now, as you read these words, something is happening. Not just neurons firing, not just signals moving through a biological machine. There is an experience occurring. There is awareness. Pause for a moment and press your fingers gently together. Feel that sensation. Notice that there is not only contact between two pieces of skin, there is also the undeniable fact that you feel it. Now here is the puzzle. Physics can tell us what your skin is made of. Chemistry can explain the molecules. Biology can describe the nerve fibers transmitting signals to your brain. Neuroscience can map the regions that activate when touch is detected. But nowhere in any of those descriptions do we encounter the feeling itself. We find processes, we find mechanisms, we find electrical activity. What we do not find is the experiencer. Try to point to it. Where is the you that feels? Most people instinctively gesture toward their head. That seems reasonable. After all, the brain is the control center of the body. But when scientists examine the brain with extraordinary precision, what do they discover? Cells, chemical gradients, electrical impulses. No scientist has ever opened a brain and located a tiny glowing entity labeled consciousness. This is not a minor gap in knowledge. It may be the deepest mystery confronting modern science. Let us approach it from another direction. Look around wherever you are sitting. Notice the colors, the shapes, the depth of space. Perhaps you hear faint background noise, traffic, wind, a distant voice. All of this feels immediate and obvious. But what is actually happening? Light reflects off objects and enters your eyes. These are electromagnetic waves, nothing more than oscillations in fields traveling through space. When they strike the retina, they trigger electrochemical events. Signals move along the optic nerve into the visual cortex. Up to this point, everything is standard physics and biology. And then something astonishing occurs. You see red, you see blue, you perceive a world. But here is the strange part. The light itself is not red. It has a wavelength, roughly 700 nanometers if we want to be precise. But redness is not a property of the wave. It is a property of experience. Likewise, neurons are not red. They are simply cells exchanging ions across membranes. So where does the redness exist? Philosophers use the word qualia to describe this, the raw texture of experience, the sting of pain, the sweetness of sugar, the vividness of color. These are not merely bits of information. They are felt realities. Somewhere there is a point of view. You might be tempted to say, well, obviously consciousness comes from the brain, but that is not an explanation. It is merely a label placed on the mystery. Imagine asking how a spacecraft launches into orbit and being told, because of the rocket. That answer invites a deeper question. How does the rocket work? Fuel burns, gases expand, thrust is produced, every step is understandable. Now attempt the same chain with consciousness. Photons strike the retina. Signals travel through neurons, networks activate, and then experience appears. Where is the step that converts electrical activity into subjective awareness? We do not know. More surprisingly, we do not even know what such an explanation would look like. The philosopher David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. There are many easy problems, though they are hardly easy in practice. How does the brain recognize patterns? How does it guide behavior? How does it combine sensory inputs? These are engineering challenges. Difficult, yes, but conceptually solvable. The hard problem asks something entirely different. Why is any of this accompanied by an inner life at all? Why is there something it is like to be you? Consider a thought experiment. Suppose engineers construct a machine that behaves exactly like a human being. It speaks fluently, reacts emotionally, avoids danger, tells jokes, even insists it is conscious. From the outside, there is no difference between the machine and a person. But inside, perhaps, there is nothing. No experience, no awareness, only computation. Could such a thing exist? Physics alone does not forbid it. Nothing in our equations specifies which arrangements of matter must produce experience. That should unsettle you. Another philosopher, Thomas Nagel, posed a famous question. What is it like to be a bat? Bats perceive the world through echolocation. Their reality is structured by returning sound waves rather than reflected light. You can try to imagine this, but you will inevitably translate it into human terms. You cannot step fully into the bat's perspective. Experience is inherently tied to a point of view. Science, on the other hand, strives for objectivity, descriptions that hold regardless of who observes them. And here lies a profound tension. How can objective science explain something fundamentally subjective? Now let me deepen the mystery. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, forming trillions of connections. Visual features are processed in different regions, color in one place, motion in another, shape somewhere else. Yet when you look at an apple, you do not perceive fragmented attributes scattered across space. You see one unified object. How does the brain assemble this seamless picture? This is called the binding problem, and despite decades of research, no definitive solution exists. Some scientists propose that synchronized neural firing ties these elements together. Perhaps when neurons oscillate in harmony, the brain tags their signals as belonging to the same object. But synchrony explains coordination, not experience. It tells us when neurons fire, not why their activity should feel like anything. After all, neurons in two different brains can fire at similar rhythms without merging into a shared consciousness. So why is your experience yours alone? Let us go deeper still. Your brain is made of atoms, unimaginably many of them, yet those atoms are constantly replaced. The particles in your body today are largely different from those of years past. So consciousness cannot depend on specific atoms. It must depend on patterns. But atoms themselves are mostly empty space, structured by invisible fields. What you call your brain is really a dynamic process, a choreography of energy unfolding moment by moment, and somehow that process is aware of itself. Some researchers speculate that electromagnetic fields generated by neural activity might play a role. Fields naturally integrate information across space, potentially offering a physical basis for unified experience. It is an intriguing idea, but magnets also have fields. Radios generate fields. We do not attribute consciousness to them. So again, the question returns. Why should any physical process feel like something from the inside? Others look toward quantum mechanics, hoping its strangeness might illuminate the mystery. Perhaps microscopic quantum events inside neurons contribute to awareness. Maybe. Yet even if quantum effects are involved, the core puzzle remains untouched. Quantum theory describes behavior, probabilities, interaction, not the emergence of experience. Calling consciousness quantum risks replacing one mystery with another. Here is a thought experiment I find particularly unsettling. Imagine recording every physical detail of a brain as it perceives a red apple. Every spike, every molecule, every field fluctuation. Now recreate that pattern perfectly elsewhere. Does the experience reappear? If you slowed the process down, would the experience stretch in time? If you reversed it, would perception run backward? We have no answers. It suggests that consciousness depends not merely on components, but on structure and dynamics, though what structure is sufficient remains unknown. Some thinkers argue that consciousness is an illusion, but pause and consider that statement carefully. An illusion is itself an experience. If something seems real, there must be a subject to whom it seems that way. Dismissing consciousness as illusion does not remove it, it presupposes it. So where does this leave us? Perhaps, and I emphasize perhaps, consciousness is not something that emerges from physics, but something fundamental within it. Mass is fundamental. Charge is fundamental. Space-time itself appears fundamental. Why not consciousness? If that is true, the goal may not be to reduce it further, but to discover the laws connecting physical processes to subjective experience. This is speculative territory. Physicists are not always comfortable here. We prefer equations that close neatly. Yet after centuries of progress, the hard problem remains untouched. That fact alone should command our humility. Let me end with a simple observation. Whatever else may be uncertain, one thing is undeniable. You are having experiences right now. The sensation of your body, the perception of words, the flow of thoughts. These are the most immediate realities you will ever know. And yet, according to physics, you are an arrangement of particles governed by impersonal laws. A universe built from atoms has somehow produced beings who can wonder about the universe. Matter has begun to notice itself. And perhaps the strangest possibility of all is this. Now, if you are feeling slightly unsettled, that is exactly the right reaction. Science has a long history of removing humanity from the center of things. First, we learned that Earth is not the center of the universe. Then we learned that our galaxy is just one among hundreds of billions. Then evolution taught us that we are not specially constructed beings, but the result of natural processes stretching back billions of years. Each step made the universe feel larger, and us smaller. But consciousness reverses that emotional direction in a very peculiar way, because no matter how vast the universe becomes, every bit of it that you will ever know exists only inside experience. The galaxies you admire through telescopes, the equations describing space-time, the ancient light from the cosmic microwave background, all of it appears within awareness. In that sense, consciousness is not just another feature of the universe, it is the stage upon which the universe becomes knowable at all. Let me sharpen the paradox. Physics describes a world that exists independently of observers. Electrons do not wait for you to notice them before behaving like electrons. Gravity does not turn off when nobody is watching, and yet the only access we have to this supposedly observer-independent world comes through observation. Somewhere between the objective universe and subjective awareness lies a bridge we do not understand. For centuries, scientists assumed that this bridge was straightforward. The world causes sensory inputs, the brain processes them, and perception results. Simple chain of causation. But when you look closely, the simplicity evaporates. What you perceive is not the world itself. It is a reconstruction. Your brain receives fragments of data and builds a model. In fact, neuroscience strongly suggests that perception is largely predictive. The brain constantly generates expectations about what is out there and updates them when errors occur. So, in a very real sense, what you experience is not raw reality, but an internal simulation constrained by incoming signals. That may sound unsettling, but it gets stranger. There is a measurable delay, tens to hundreds of milliseconds, between sensory input and conscious awareness. By the time you experience now, your brain has already processed the past, yet you never feel delayed. Experience presents itself as immediate. Your brain is not simply reporting reality, it is editing it. Now ask yourself, if the brain is constructing the world you experience, where exactly is that world? It is not outside. The outside is just electromagnetic fields and particle interactions. It is not literally inside your skull either. There is no tiny theater in the brain where images appear. And yet, undeniably, you experience a world extended in space around you. Philosophers sometimes call this the Cartesian theater, the imagined place where perception supposedly plays out. But neuroscience has found no such theater. There is processing everywhere, representation everywhere, but no central screen. So who exactly is watching? Let me push this further with another thought experiment. Imagine replacing your neurons one by one with perfectly functioning artificial components, not crude electronics, but devices that replicate the exact input-output behavior of each neuron. Same signals, same timing, same network dynamics. At what point would consciousness disappear? Would it fade gradually? Would there be a sudden blackout when neuron number 42,381,112 gets replaced? Or would nothing change at all? If nothing changes, then consciousness must depend only on functional organization, not biological material. Silicon would work just as well as carbon. But if something does change, if artificial systems lack inner life, then biology contains some ingredient we have not yet recognized. Either possibility is revolutionary. Now consider an even stranger scenario. Suppose we scan your brain in complete detail and use that information to construct two identical copies. Which one is you? Both would remember your childhood. Both would recognize your friends. Both would insist they are the original. Yet they cannot both be numerically identical to you because they are separate streams of experience. This reveals something profound. Personal identity is not just about information. It is about continuity of perspective, the unbroken flow of subjectivity. But what is that flow made of? Physics describes states, not perspectives, and this is where our conceptual toolkit begins to fail us. Let us turn briefly to time, because consciousness seems inseparable from it. You do not experience isolated moments. You experience duration, a flowing present that carries traces of the past and anticipations of the future. Yet fundamental physics treats time very differently. Many equations work just as well forward as backward. At the microscopic level, there is little preference for direction. So why does experience have an arrow? Why do you remember yesterday but not tomorrow? Part of the answer lies in entropy, the statistical tendency toward disorder, which gives macroscopic time its direction. Memories are records of lower entropy states embedded in higher entropy ones. But entropy alone does not explain the feeling of temporal passage. Physics can describe a sequence of states, but the sensation of now moving forward is something else entirely. Some philosophers even suggest that the flow of time may be a feature of consciousness rather than of the universe itself. If that were true, it would invert our usual picture. Instead of minds existing within time, time, as experienced, might exist within minds. Strange, but worth contemplating. Now let me show you how modern physics complicates matters further. According to relativity, there is no universal present moment. Events that are simultaneous for you may not be simultaneous for someone moving at high speed relative to you. The universe does not come equipped with a cosmic clock ticking in unison everywhere. Yet your experience insists on a present. A vivid, undeniable now. Where does that come from? Again, the answer seems tied to the structure of conscious processing rather than the structure of space-time itself. It is as if the brain carves out a local now from a universe that has no global one. Let me step back and ask a broader question. Why should the universe contain beings capable of awareness at all? From a purely physical standpoint, atoms could have gone on colliding and clustering without ever producing creatures who wonder about their own existence. And yet, here we are. Some thinkers invoke the anthropic principle. We observe a universe compatible with observers because otherwise we would not be here to observe it. That is logically sound, but it does not feel deeply explanatory. It tells us why we should not be surprised, not why consciousness exists in the first place. There is another perspective that some physicists quietly entertain, though it borders on philosophy. Perhaps consciousness is not a rare accident, but a natural consequence of increasing complexity. Given enough time and the right conditions, matter organizes itself into systems that model their environments. Eventually, those models become rich enough that the system includes itself within them. Self-modeling may be the seed of awareness. But notice, even this idea explains function, not feeling. A system might represent itself without there being anything it is like to be that system. So the gap remains. Let me offer one more possibility, speculative but intriguing. Instead of asking how matter produces consciousness, perhaps we should consider whether information itself has experiential aspects. Some theories propose that whenever information is integrated in certain ways, a primitive form of experience accompanies it. Not human-level awareness, of course, something far simpler. If that sounds radical, remember that many once controversial ideas are now standard. Space and time being flexible would have seemed absurd before Einstein. Still, we must be cautious. Expanding consciousness too broadly risks explaining everything and therefore explaining nothing. Yet the persistence of the mystery suggests we may need conceptual tools as transformative as relativity or quantum mechanics once were. Now, I want you to notice something very immediate. As you listen to these ideas, thoughts are arising, perhaps curiosity, perhaps skepticism, perhaps a quiet sense of wonder. Those thoughts are not abstract events floating somewhere in the cosmos. They are experiences happening right now. Whatever theory eventually succeeds must account for that simple fact, not metaphorically, not approximately, precisely. Until then, consciousness stands as a reminder that our scientific map of reality is incomplete. This is not a failure of science. It is an invitation. The greatest discoveries often begin with puzzles that seem almost impossible. Remember, there was a time when the nature of light was utterly mysterious, when atoms were hypothetical, when gravity was a force acting at a distance with no mechanism. Today, those mysteries feel manageable because new frameworks emerged. Consciousness may require a framework equally profound. And here is the thought I want to leave resonating in your mind. For billions of years, the universe expanded in silence. Stars formed, burned, and died. Galaxies collided. Planets cooled. Then, on at least one small world, matter arranged itself into structures that could ask a question no star ever asked. What is happening, and why am I aware of it? When you reflect on your own awareness, the universe is not merely evolving, it is becoming self-reflective. Hydrogen, forged in the first minutes after the Big Bang, is now part of brains contemplating the Big Bang. If that does not strike you as extraordinary, pause and think again. Because whatever consciousness ultimately turns out to be, fundamental property, emergent phenomenon, or something entirely beyond our current categories, one thing is already clear. Through you, the cosmos has developed the ability to notice that it exists, and that may be the most astonishing development in the entire 13.8 billion year story of reality. This is speculative territory. Physicists are not always comfortable here. We prefer equations that close neatly. Yet after centuries of progress, the hard problem remains untouched. That fact alone should command our humility. Let me end with a simple observation. Whatever else may be uncertain, one thing is undeniable. You are having experiences right now. The sensation of your body, the perception of words, the flow of thoughts. These are the most immediate realities you will ever know, and yet, according to physics, you are an arrangement of particles governed by impersonal laws. A universe built from atoms has somehow produced beings who can wonder about the universe. Matter has begun to notice itself, and perhaps the strangest possibility of all is this. The cosmos is not only out there, spread across galaxies and cosmic voids. In a very real sense, it is awake, right here, looking back at itself through you.